All right, I hope we gave enough time for everybody to join. It'll be our first of 2017 Is Solar Right for You webinar. We do have other educational workshops and events that I'd like to take time now to tell you about. Please go to smud.org and in the search function hit workshops. You'll see that we have designated workshops for our residential as well as our commercial customers. And those could range from lighting to HVAC to solar to electric vehicles. And on the commercial side, there's actually classes that we have that provide certificates to help their careers and employment. So once again, please check out smud.org /workshops or type workshops in the search function. If you have any questions for our speaker, we will have a representative that is a solar expert to handle those questions while we have our webinar in session. Please do remember that the session will be recorded, and if you have any concerns of that, please let us know through the question board. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter this evening. His name is Hector Ortiz, and he is one of our reigning experts and understands residential as well as commercial solar. Thank you for joining.
Okay, hello everyone. Hopefully you guys can understand me. If I'm too low, the volume is too low or anything like that, just feel free to type it in there, and then Levi will let me know, or I'll try and adjust my loudness, because I think so. We'll just go ahead and get started. I'm going to kind of try to go through these slides, and then if we go too fast, then I'll have some time at the end to maybe clear some stuff up or go over it. But Levi is going to be on the other computer, like he mentioned, so feel free to type in a question if you have it. You know, sometimes I might go through one part and not make it clear, but feel free to type in there and say, clarify that, or ask more specific or something like that. So a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of basic at the beginning, but we're just going to try to cover a lot of info. So if you can see the slideshow there, I'll go ahead and get started. So I can click my, let's see, my software is not going here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so if you can see that first slide come through, I'll start with definition. So KW, you're going to hear that a lot when you're getting presentations or bids or estimates or talking solar. So KW is going to be how they size systems. Typically, they're in thousands of watts. So, for example, you might hear them say, we're going to offer you a 3 kW system. So that number is what it can generate at its best situation. So when the sun is perfectly perpendicular to those panels, it's probably going to do the max 3 kW. So if the system turns on at 8 in the morning all the way to 7 at night, most of the time it won't be doing 3 kW. It's only going to hit that top point at the perfect perpendicular angle. So when it turns on in the morning, it might only do 500 watts, and then 1,000, and so on. And it goes on up like that. KWH, so that's what you buy from your utility or SMUD. So when you have a 3 kW system, then it really matters how long of a time period did that run and generate whatever it does. So it may start off generating 500 watts to 1,000 watts, but when it hits, when it runs for an hour, that meter will record how long it generated at that time period. And that's what you're going to avoid purchasing from SMUD or sending back to SMUD. So the KW is the potential, and then how long it runs for what period of time is at KWH. And then the next one, generation. So that, again, it goes through KWH, is what produced by the PV system. Those KWHs, that energy, you're either going to consume it or export it. In most cases, these solar systems are not designed to store any of that energy. So if you're making too much, you're going to send it right back to the grid, and you'll get credit for that. And if you need more, you'll get the rest of it from the grid. So you'll just consume or export that energy, one or the other. Net metering. KWH is what you take from SMUD or your utility versus what you send back. So a perfect example of that is at nighttime. Solar systems don't work at night because there's no sun. So you're always going to be pulling energy from the grid at that time. So your meter will be recording what you buy from the grid, KWHs. In the daytime when the solar system's working now, you could continue to buy from the grid if you're not making enough, but if you're making too much, you're going to be sending some of that energy back to the grid. So net metering is basically what you purchased from the grid versus what you sent back or sold back, the difference of that. So that's, and it's usually on a monthly basis still. So an example would be is in a month if you purchased 1,000, but you sold back 500, then you would just pay for the difference, which would be 500. And in case you're wondering, on the other hand, if you purchased 1,000, but you sent back 1,200 or more, you would get credit for that extra 200. So you would equal credit all the way through. The next one is PPA, the Power Purchase Agreement with a third-party system owner. That's what we see a lot of right now on the residential side, actually even in the commercial side. So that's when you might either lease a system or this Power Purchase Agreement. So somebody would come along, put the system on your home, it's generating power, and you're really only taking the power or purchasing the power, or you're paying for renting the equipment, let's say. So you wouldn't own the equipment, you're just taking the power from it. Mechanically and physically, they work the same way, whether you own it or you're renting or PPA. The energy is the same thing. There's no difference in the mechanics of it. It's just how it's paid for. So you would pay maybe a company that owns it a certain amount for those KWHs, which hopefully will be less than what you would have paid us or SMUD for that. Hopefully that PPA makes a little sense there. Okay, so this is kind of general information. Systems are sized in KW. We kind of talked about that KW. So they're typically sized based on your existing loads or what you consumed previously. So let's say a contractor might say, let's look at your bills from the last 12 months. If it shows you use an average of 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, then they want to size a system that could make at the most 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. So you don't want to oversize these systems. And there'll be some reason we'll go through why that is. PV systems generate electricity, so we've already talked about generate power. It's how much power over how much time converts into that KWHs, which is what you buy from the utility. And then we say north-facing systems cost the same as south-facing. The reason we say that is because once it comes down to it, they put these systems on your roof really based on where you have the available space. So if your roof happens to be facing north and south, but on the south side you have a ton of trees that shade that whole south side, they may suggest let's put it on the north side. So what we're saying kind of to keep in mind is that it's going to generate less power on the north just because it's on the north versus the south. But you're going to pay the same for that system. So where they put it doesn't necessarily change the cost of the system. It's still the same system. It might generate more or less power on wherever they put it. But just keep that in mind. And the cost of the system is whatever it costs them to do it. How well it does is kind of a whole different thing. The next one there says modules vary in size and output. So that's kind of an interesting one because if you get an offer to put a system and they say we're using 250 watt modules, another company might say, well, we're going to use 300 watt modules. It doesn't really matter the specific size of the module. The key thing is what's the size of the system. So if one guy says, I'm going to put 4K, but I'm using 250s, the other guy says, I'm putting 4K, but I'm using 350s, you're still getting 4 kilowatts of solar. The modules may be physically smaller or larger in size based on that number. So it's not that critical what size they're using. It's more what are you getting in kWs. So hopefully that makes sense. And as you might guess, sizes continue to go up with time. So 10 years ago we were using 180s or 200s. Now we're using 280s or 300s or 350s. So they kind of increase based on the ability to manufacture. Let's see, the next one is inverter. The inverter converts DC to AC. So these modules, as the sunlight hits the module, it generates direct current or DC power. But it needs to be converted over to AC, which is what we use in homes or businesses. So that conversion happens in this piece of equipment called the inverter. Systems may now have multiple inverters. So if you have an example would be if you have a 6 kilowatt system, you could use 2 3 kW inverters. They could use 1 6 kW inverter, or for that matter, they could use what's called micro inverters, which would possibly be 30 of them. So you may have a whole bunch of inverters, but basically that's what they do, is they convert the power from DC direct current to AC alternating current. Let's see, the next one, modules have a 20-plus year performance warranty. Most companies offer that kind of warranty on the modules, 20-plus years. So they may say you get a 20-year performance warranty, which means they expect that module to last at least 20 years without losing any more than 1% per year. So there is a small number there that they expect. So that means that if you buy a module, 300 watts, they expect it to generate 80% of that or more after the 20 years. It may even do better than that. It may still do 90%, but they kind of plan that most of these will do 1% a year for up to 20 years or more. Most inverters on the market come with a 10-year warranty. There's going to be 2 types I mentioned. There's what we call a box inverter. So that's when you have one box on the wall and it handles all the modules. Then the micro inverters, there's one inverter per module right on the roof. Some of the microinverter manufacturers have a 25-year warranty on those. Most of the box inverters are still 10. Some of the micros are also 10. So that's the kind of a warranty stuff you'll see on the inverters, either 10-year or jump up maybe to a 25-year from the manufacturers. That's another thing too. You might see contractors offer different, or companies might say, we're going to add some time to that, or have a different warranty period that they are going to support. So let's see here. So this slide just kind of goes over a little bit of how the solar system works. So you can see we have a pole there, a utility pole. The power comes from that pole. It goes to your service panel. That's how you normally get power from SMUD. So right before it gets to your breakers or the main breaker, it goes through the SMUD meter. And it records how much you're actually drawing from the grid or pulling. When they hook up the solar system, they're going to land. Typically, they hook up the solar right to one of those breakers. They just put a new breaker, and now they're hooking up the solar panels to one of those breakers. So when the solar is generating, the sun hits those modules, the PV solar array. It creates DC power. It comes through that black wire. It goes into that green box called the inverter. It converts it over to the AC power I mentioned. The AC power will now go through what we call a PV generation meter. And that's because we want to record how much energy did that system generate. It records through there, and then it goes right to that breaker. where I mentioned they're going to land. Once it's at that breaker, that energy mixes with the other energy coming from SMUD. So that's where it all basically decides where to go. If you need all the solar power, it will be distributed among all those breakers. If you need more, you will get more from SMUD through that black wire coming from the pole. If you happen to be making enough power where you don't need it all, the breakers will take what they need, and the rest of it gets sent right back up through that black wire where you see that red arrow going back to the pole, which means it records on that AC utility meter, theoretically in the backward motion. So that's how we know how much did you buy from us going down the pole versus how much you sold back going back up the pole. Those two readings, that's what's critical on the bill. We want to know how much did you buy and how much did you sell. And then you just pay or get credit for the difference. The PV generation meter is really just a piece of data. It's just telling us how much did the system generate. Your inverter will also display that same info. But with this generation meter, we get that data directly off the meter since we'll own that meter. So that's the difference between those two meters and kind of a quick explanation of how that thing works. Okay, so the net metering practice, you can see how it kind of, okay, so on the left there, PV generation offsets the kWh's that SMUD would normally deliver. So again, if you were going to buy 25 kilowatt hours today, but your PV system was generating that power, it would feed it right into your service panel, which avoids you having to buy it from SMUD. So you just wouldn't pull it through that meter. You see the purple one, I'll go to the purple one, kWh delivered by SMUD and kWh exported to SMUD are valued at the same rate. So that's where what you buy and what you send back, that's always the same rate at whatever it is at the time. But so the difference is what would show up on that net energy metering. The middle green one, kWh not consumed by your home, is exported to SMUD's grid. So that's when you are overproducing. That one, the question that comes up most is the cost. So yes, right now, as everything stands in the industry, it's all one-for-one or equal value. So if you're buying power at a given time, whatever it is you're buying it for at that time, if all of a sudden you're exporting power, you would be getting the same value for it, the same kind of credit as if you were buying it. You're going to sell it for the same rate. So hopefully that all makes sense. But feel free to throw in a question there if it needs to be. Levi will gladly respond. So let's see, I will go. So toward TOU rate design, I don't know if anybody's heard, but what TOU is, time of use. So instead of just charging for power based on the kWh's, the total kWh's on a monthly basis, it's going to be eventually billed at the time that you use it. So right now, if you do laundry at 2 in the morning or 12 noon or 7 p.m., it doesn't really change the price. What does change it is, let's say the first 2 weeks of the month, you use a certain amount of power, then the next 2 weeks you might pay a higher rate because there might be 2 tiers. So it's the first tier and second tier. But the time of the day that you consumed it doesn't really matter right now. But time of use comes, it will. So that means that if you do laundry between a certain window, you will pay whatever the rate is in that window of time. So an example would be if you do laundry at midnight, it's likely that it's going to cost less than if you do it at 5 p.m. because at 5 p.m. everybody wants power, and it always costs more to deliver that power at that time. well, the cost of power itself and the delivery. So that's a quick on time of use, what it is. So here you see it broken down. In 2015, we had a tiered rate structure. We had a base and a base plus. The base is 770 kWhs in the winter, 835 in the summer. Okay. That basically means that during the beginning of the month, you start consuming power. When you hit that 770, the rate would change to a higher number. Everything after that would be at that cost. So you might hit that 770 the first week, the second week, the third week, whenever that happens. You may never hit it in a month, depending on your total usage. In 2016, we still had a tiered rate, base and base plus, but you'll see the base changed to 1,000, and then in the summer it went to 1,100 instead. And in 2016, now we offered time to use as an option. That was actually offered for solar customers and electric vehicle customers to start trying this thing out and see how people tend to adjust for that time of use. So 2017, we're going to start what we call converging the tiers. So instead of having, let's say, I believe right now the rate is 14 cents and 18 cents, more or less. So they'll start squeezing those things together. So it might be 15 and 17, and then they might go to 16 and 16 and a half or something like that. But they're going to come to a point where all KWs will be the same. They might have a winter and summer rates. Okay, and in 2017, we're still offering it as an option. But the plan might be to go to 2018, mandatory time of use. So everybody will eventually go to it. If you have solar, it you know, could be better or worse or about the same. It just depends on a lot of little factors. So that's something to kind of keep a watch for, and we'll have some more things on time of use, I think. So here's a proposed example of what time of use might look like. So this chart here. So if you can see from 9 a.m. on the bottom black, 9 a.m. to 9 a.m., that's a 24-hour window, okay, from the start of the blue to the end of the yellow. And then if you look at just the blue, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., that 12-hour window would be all year, Monday through Friday. It's a 12-hour window, and that rate, you could see, it might be 14.67. That would be the peak time, what they call a peak. Then you'll see the yellow goes 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. It's the other 12 hours, Monday through Friday all year, and that's the off-peak, so that might be 8.6 cents. So everything that you have a choice of consuming, that's the time period that you would want to do it. An example, running pool pumps. You kind of have a choice on that. Washer and dryer. You know, other things that might, like I said, if you have a choice of when you can run them, that'd be the time. So that's the kind of changes that we'll be making. Things that you may not have options are, obviously, if you have an electric cooktop, you're going to cook when you cook. But maybe you can shift those times around a little bit. But the big ones, obviously, are going to be like air conditioning, heating, and things like that, that you got to have them when you got to have them. So those are the tougher ones, but you know, we can still make adjustments. So the purple one on the top, that's going to be what looks like might be called super peak summer. So those are the really tight times for buying and distributing energy. So that's going to be a 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Slice that fits into that blue area in the summer months, June through September. So that is when everybody runs the ACs, and we need the most amount of power to distribute, and it also happens to be the most expensive time to buy power. So that will be the higher price. So you could see the ideal time not to do laundry and not to run pool pumps or equipment like that would be between the 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. That's weekdays only. This is all the proposed plan for now. So it's yet to be determined if this will be the specific one. It may change in small details. Let's see here. So here's a slide. It's all production the same. So when is solar produced? This kind of gives us a lot of nice data. Sometimes if you're going to put solar, it's going to go where it fits on the roof, and that's the end of discussion, sort of. You may not have a lot of options, but here's an example of what it does in different places. So we do know that when solar is produced, 25% happens during January through April. 50% of the generation is probably going to be between May and August, and then the other 25 September to December. That has to do with mainly the way the sun lands, right? So we know it hits the highest point in summer on June 21, and then the lowest point in the winter, December 21. So at the time when it's the highest point is going to be probably when it overall generates the most, which is at May through August. That next section says the south array produces the most overall energy. So what we've seen in all the systems that we have out there that we monitor, which is approximately 15,000, is we do see that when they're facing south and they have very good energy possibilities, so there's no big shading trees or anything like that, the south array is still overall the best. Versus, well, the north would really never be an option unless it's an absolute must-have, last resort, nowhere else to go kind of type thing. The east and west facing arrays, they produce about the same amount of energy. One is going to do it in the morning and one is going to do it in the afternoon period. Okay, so they produce morning or afternoon energy, respectively. It's about 12 to 50% less than a south-facing array. This is assuming that none of them have a tremendous amount of shading. So if you have a west-facing roof slope and you think, I want to go west, and if that's where all the shade trees are at, it's probably going to be a lot worse in the east, even though we're saying here they make the same amount. And so shading is a big factor. But assuming you have the same amount of shading on both sides, they produce the same amount, pretty much, east and west facing. On the bottom, we say west arrays produce more energy during the late afternoon peak. The reason we say that is when we go to time of use, afternoon is going to be the important time to generate your own power, because that's when we're going to charge you more for it. So the afternoon generation, you can see there between 4 and 7 p.m. peak is where it really works out. So if you have a choice of east or west, west might be the better option because you might get more benefit of that same generation. Let's see here. So, excuse me. Purchase options. So you see there on purchase, you can probably have already thought of this, but you could finance a system, obviously, through any bank or any other way you feel you can finance. A purchase, you can also just do cash, which is probably the best overall because you don't pay any finance charges, maybe. There's a 30% federal tax credit that goes to the system owner. So that's something important when you're looking to do this. Which means if you're going to lease the system, the 30% federal tax credit won't do anything for you because you won't own it. It goes to the owner, which is fine because the likelihood is if you're going to lease a system, you're going to get a better price than if you were buying a system. You're not going to pay as much up front, maybe. So you can either finance it, you could do a cash purchase, and that 30% federal tax credit goes to you, the system owner, if you're buying. The 30%, by the way, is 30% of your end cost. So if you're in SMUD territory, you might get a $500 incentive. So whatever the cost is minus the 500, that's what your system cost would be. You would get 30% federal tax credit toward that price. And that's a tax credit, so that means that you have to still be in a situation where you are filing federal taxes every year. So if you said, I'm retired, I no longer file federal taxes, well, then you don't get a credit because there's no credit to be given. So keep that in mind. That is more of a tax question or issue, but keep that in mind. So if you get bids, everyone's assuming that you file federal taxes and that you will get that 30% federal tax credit. If by chance your federal tax liabilities are small enough where the 30% would be larger than your liability, you can spread that out over several years. I believe it's 5. So if you're doing a big system and you're going to get a, I don't know, $20,000 tax credit or something, and for some reason you don't have $20,000 liability that year, you can take $10,000 and then next year take the other 10. So you don't really lose any of that tax credit. You take it up to year after year for 5 years, I believe. But that is a tax question, and so you want to just verify those kind of things with tax people. So the third-party ownership we show there, they get the tax benefits. They get the depreciation benefit of that when they do their taxes. They own the system. Let's see, third-party power purchase agreement. So that's, again, you could either be signing a power purchase agreement. That means you're gonna buy the power that system makes instead of buying that from SMUD, hopefully for a slightly lesser amount. So if we charge 14 cents a kilowatt hour, you know, if you're going to pay them 15 cents per kilowatt hour, that's probably not a great deal. So it's whatever you're going to save on that difference. That's the value of it. When you lease, that's still a possibility. So instead of a PPA, they might say you're leasing equipment. Again, the mechanics are the same. You're just going to pay them a certain amount for the equipment. But what it generates would be a separate thing, and that probably goes to you as well. But there's slightly different varieties in that, because if you sign a lease for the equipment now, you know, it may be determined how well does it do, whether it does better or worse sometimes. It's going to be reflected on your bill only. Where if you do a PPA, you might get benefits of guarantees. So they might say, you're only going to pay for what it generates. Well, if we have 3 weeks of storms, probably not going to generate much, but maybe you only pay for what you generate. So those are kind of things to keep in mind when you start looking at the PPAs and leases. So financial considerations. So this is the average cost for installations that we see right now. And we like to say per kilowatt in AC. That's kind of how we like to look at it, in AC power, because that's ultimately what you're sending back to us or buying from us. So you're probably still looking at somewhere between $3.50 and $4 a watt. Okay, so if it was $4 right down the middle and you're buying a 3 kW system, that should fall somewhere in the range of $12,000, right? So somewhere in there. That doesn't mean they're all going to be that price, but that's an average that we see and you should be looking for. If you get a bid and he says it's $7 a watt, there's got to be a reason for that. So the difference would be if you have a single-story home with a relatively easy-to-walk-on asphalt roof, that will definitely be easier to install than if you have a 2-story with concrete tile that's got a really steep angle on it. So that might change the price there, but you still should be somewhere in the $4 range for a typical system installation versus anything more difficult. Might go to $5, but you don't want to be anywhere in the 8s, 9s, or 10s. I don't think there should be any system out there costing that much anymore. The average system size, we just put that on there because of all the systems in Sacramento, that we've seen, the average is falling about 5 kW. We see a lot of 2Ks, a lot of 3Ks, mostly in new construction, but we do see the bigger homes getting anywhere from 7 to 6 or even 8 or 9. But overall, the average is 5 kW. Generation kW rule of thumb. This is per kW, so 1,600 kilowatt hours per year per kW. So if you put a system in a 3 kW, you could expect more or less 3 times that per year. And that number probably more reflects the south-facing array with relatively good conditions. So if you said, I have a west-facing with 16 redwoods right in front of it, you're probably going to see nowhere near the 16 kWhs, 1,600 per year. So you'll see less, but all that should be looked at prior to installing. But 1,600 per kWh is a pretty good rule of thumb to go by if you're wondering how do you figure how much it'll make. And we'll have a little sheet later when we show some of those numbers. Right now, the SMUD incentive, we'll call it, it actually now might be referred to on our website as a stipend. So it's $500. Early on, I showed you a graph of how these things work. There's a meter that we install, and that's so we can monitor the generation of this system. So in order for the contractor to install that meter, along with a mechanical disconnect, so it could be a service, those 2 pieces of equipment should be installed. So for that, we're including the cost of that and the labor to do that, which is, we figure at least 500 or in that ball range. So the 500 will cover that portion of the system, is that meter and the disconnect. So that the incentive or that number isn't determined on system size or any generation or anything. It's just simply for those 2 pieces of equipment. The last one on there, the federal tax credit, again, it's still 30% of the project cost. That should still go on for a while. So once in a while we see customers call us and they'll tell us, hey, I got to make a decision because it's close to the end of the year. I don't want to miss out on this 30%. We're nowhere near that anymore. They've extended that out. Last year, no rush. This year, there should be no rush. Next year, there should be no rush. So keep that in mind only because it always becomes a good tool for salespeople to try and get you to rush through things. So as far as the 30%, you have plenty of time. Okay, so here's some more cost numbers. Again, the purchase, now here they got $345 to $450. Which probably a slide comes from a different version of the show we did. But it's still about the same. Somewhere in that range is what we're seeing. We call it CECAC, which is California Energy Commission AC rating. So that's kind of what the way we, again, that's what you buy from SMUD, AC power. So it makes sense to try and compare that kind of number to a system that you might purchase. If you use DC power, it's not going to be any worse or better. It's just simply a different number that has to be sort of calculated out. So a DC number will always be a higher number. So an AC 3 kW system might be 3.5 kW in DC. But you would feel like you're getting a bigger system, but you're really not. It's just a different way of calculation. So you own the tax credit. So again, if you purchase, you get the 30% federal tax. 245 to 315 watt post-saving, post-tax. So after you get the tax credit, that would be what it might come out to, somewhere between 245 to 315 a watt. That one doesn't help a whole lot right now, unless you're trying to compare that to some bid or something. The next one is 7 cents or 9 cents per kilowatt hour levelized cost of energy. So that's what you might end up paying if you were getting that kind of deal. So I guess to compare would be in the middle there's 8 cents a kilowatt hour. If you're paying SMUD right now somewhere between 14 and 18, even 10, I believe we have, or 11. So if you're paying anywhere between 10 and 18, you're still below that if you get this kind of pricing. So you would be generating some of your power for as little as 8 cents as opposed to 10 or 18. So that's where the savings would come in. If you paid too much for a system, let's say you paid in the $7 or $8 range, you could see how that number would go up. So now it would seem like you would be generating power at maybe 14.1, where you could have purchased it for 14 without doing anything. So that's something to keep in mind. All those numbers are kind of in the long run critical. Otherwise, you'll end up finding that you're really just putting a system in for the sake of having a system or having clean energy or something, which is fine, but saving money should always be considered. Think of the inverter replacement. These numbers kind of calculate it out. So since they all have, or almost all have, a 10-year warranty, you could kind of expect or plan on possibly having to replace it between 11 and 13 years. So that's going to be a cost that should be counted in the 20-year or 30-year lifespan, because if you replace it at, let's say, 12, and it lasts 25 years, now halfway through the middle, you had to spend an extra whatever it costs to do that. The next green spot there, PPA and lease again. So these are just some of the key things. So those, some of the benefits, no money down. And a lot of these PPAs, you don't put anything down. You just start making a monthly payment. And that's how you'll pay for either the lease or the energy part of it. There is no tax saving available to homeowners on that. The system owner gets all the tax benefits from that. The price range, 10 cents a kilowatt with a 2.9 escalator. A lot of the PPAs we see come through, that's more or less the price range that we see. We see bigger ones too, or higher ones, so you got to watch for them numbers. A lot of them do come with that escalator. What that means is they kind of assume that if you stay with the utility for all that power, the utility rates will go up, as they always do, like everything else. But so they're going to raise their rate also. So they might offer you 10 cents the first year. Second year will go up by 2.9%. Third year by 2.9%, and so on. So it would sort of stay in parallel with the utility kind of. So they figure that we would go up somewhere in that range, so they're going to go up somewhere in that range. Granted, if we don't go up, you will gain a little bit more. If we go up more, you will have gained some. If we don't go up, you might not make as much gain there. But on the other hand, it could be that our rates don't change for 2 years and then they go up equivalent to that 2 years. So you just never know what's going to happen on that escalator. But pay attention if they have one, because you don't want to sign something that might have a 3.5 or something escalator. Let's see the next one, that 13 cents kWh without the escalator. So if you get a deal and they say there is no escalator attached, then you may be looking at something more in the 13-cent price range, which is why there's no escalator. So if you could have bought power for 14, but you're going to pay 13, you're only saving a penny per kWh, but you're also not going to have an escalator. So the idea would stay that way for quite a while, and you would start saving every year more and more. The prepaid lease, it's a one-time payment. I don't see that one a lot anymore. That's when they come up with a number and you would pay. It's sort of like the whole lease cost. You would just pay it up front, or a good chunk of it, and then your kWhs would be a lot less, or cost of the kWh would be less. That's because you paid a big chunk. So essentially what you're doing is you're paying for the equipment right up front, so they don't have to carry that cost. You pay for it all up front, and after that, you're just going to pay for the energy, but they've already regained most of their investment. And then they just have to wait over time to collect, to actually make the profit. Let's see, the bottom one, loans. These are different types of loans and programs out there. You might have heard white, green. The other one I hear of is called PACE. Those are different programs, ways to do it. Solar companies themselves also offer loans to do solar, so they might be able to finance the system for you. You just got to watch all those costs and how that whole finance is set up. Of course, you can go to a personal bank and get a loan. One of the things on the loans, wherever you go or however you might get a loan, you'd want to check into whether or not the interest is deductible on taxes. A lot of times that has to do with whether or not there's a lien on the property. So keep that in mind in case a solar company says, we'll loan you the money and there's no lien, no strings attached, we're just going to loan it to you. Then you may not be able to write that interest off. So sometimes loans are not as bad if you can write that interest off. That again is a tax question, but it's something you want to look into, see if the type of loan you're looking at might allow you to do that. Let's see, how do I figure out this bid? So compare apples to apples. That goes back to where I was saying about AC and DC. So if one contractor offers you a bid and says, I'm doing a 4K system and I'm using this type of setup, and the 4K happens to be DC, and the next guy comes and says, I'm only going to give you a 3K, but it's AC, that might be close to the same thing. It's just different. It just is apples to oranges. So maybe the time there would be ask the DC guy, hey, can you convert this to AC for me so that I can compare? And that's easy to do. They can do that. So that's the whole goal. If they're both in DC, that probably would be a fine comparison as well. As long as they're both DC or both AC, or you get a variable to kind of match up those two numbers. But that's the key thing, is you want to compare the same type of numbers. Again, the cost per watt, well, there it just shows PV can be rated either one of the two. It just depends what they want. All modules are rated in DC because that's what they produce, DC, so they can't rate them in AC. But when you attach them to the inverter, they become AC. I'll mention that all that is set that way because, too, the inverters have a different efficiency rating. So you may have these modules with module A and inverter B is one complete rating, but if you swap that inverter B to inverter C, it has a different efficiency rating, so it will change that AC rating based on the brand and the efficiency of it. It doesn't always mean that it's worse, because it might be cheaper also. So just keep that in mind. AC rating in the end, what is it? Next one, cost per kWh. He said commodity is energy. So yes, that's what we're all talking about. Solar, all this is really the energy that you're having to buy from SMUD. How do I get it a little cheaper? How do I save money? How do I make my own? All that wraps around that energy. There are a few people that I've dealt with that do the solar just because they like it. It's a cool thing to do. There are a lot of people that do it because it's clean energy, and the more they feel they're doing clean energy, even if they lose a little bit, that's one thing to do. Some people just do it because they feel it's avoiding have to make energy with coal or any kind of a source like that. So that's fine too. You just want to know that. Is that okay? Is that the reason you're doing it? Compare. So cost divided by kWh equals dollars per kWh. So same thing. You want to take that system size, go back to that 1600 that we talked about, figure out what each of those kWs is costing you, compare to what you just could continue to buy them from the utility. Okay, working out the numbers. So this is that one little chart that I was saying. Annual generation on a 5 kW system might be about 8,000 kilowatt hours. Over a period of 20 years, might come out to 160,000 total kWhs. System cost, if you purchase it at $4 a watt times 5 kW, would be about $20,000. 30% federal tax credit would be about $6,000. SMUD incentive $500, net cost $13,500. Divide that, and you'll get a cost of about 8.3 cents per kilowatt hour. This is a really basic way to do it, but it's almost one of the simplest and only ways, besides complicated, educated guesses, sort of. So ultimately, they all do it as simple as this, because it's all just a matter of estimates anyway. The next one will just kind of be a blank. I don't know if you guys can print these out or not, but if you do print out, you can print some of these and then run some numbers yourself as you get these things. Generation value with 2016 TLD rates. This just kind of shows a lot of numbers, whether they're east facing, southeast, south. You can see how the south is 1606, and then as you go east or west, that number drops. It gives you some numbers of what might be generated, what's on peak, and then what's off peak. So you can see south, the on peak and the off peak, there's about 500 in both cases. The super peak is only 17, so if you're facing south, only 17 kWhs will be generated in that time period. Where you can see west, you'll have 37, so it's almost a little bit more than double that. You see, that's the best. So if you're facing west, super peak is the most generation. It's only 37 kWhs, but it's the most. So you can see overall, though, south is still the best direction to face. So there's a lot of numbers to look at. Other considerations. Well, the cost of money, so mattress money versus Visa debt, just basically if you have the cash, you know, maybe it's just good to pay for the system and get it done with. No charges, no finance, no bills, all the little incremental charges that you might see. If you have the cash, that might be the best way. It says Visa or debt. So same thing, if you just put it on a Visa card, you might pay finance charges for that cannot be deducted on taxes. So if you're going to do something that's financed with interest, you might want to look into what can I do to make it deductible. The longevity, your life versus system life. We occasionally see people that do this that are in their 80s and 90s. If these systems last 30 years, and your payback is somewhere in the 10-year mark, you really got to look at that. If you're 30 and you're looking at this, there's a good chance you're going to pay the system and get all the benefit out of it. So that's something to definitely look at. These things are intended to last about 30 years, and they do a pretty good job of that. Yours, what are you leaving survivors? What happens when I sell? So that's an interesting one. Those folks that I mentioned that are up there in age and do it, they may have that in mind. I'm leaving this home to my daughter or son, and I wanted to have solar so they can have a little help on the energy bill. That's a perfect reasoning if that's what they want to do. So that's, but if you think about that and you know that and you have that plan, it does make it for a better decision. What happens when I sell? So that's something to keep in mind. If you own the system, you own the home, and you want to sell it, you know, you got to come up with what you feel is worth it. If you plan to sell a home in 10 years right now, it's probably not worth putting solar. Then you're going to put it on in hopes of recovering that money. It's probably just better leave it as it is. You won't have solar on it, but you don't have to worry about recovering the money either. Payback is about 7 or 8 at least, so you'll barely be breaking even. Then you got to worry about how to recover that money. So if you said, I'm going to be here for the rest of my life, even if you're not, at least you know that there was a chance And in 7 years, you'll break even maybe, and then everything else after that will be a benefit. Again, the system, the inverter replacement is the one thing to consider, probably at 11, 12, 13 years, who knows. And then, of course, whatever warranties that you might see with that offer or bid. Negotiation is important. So we see customers pay almost twice as much as other customers. Okay, so we see customers pay $3.90 a watt. We also see customers pay $8 a watt. That customer is going to be, instead of a 6-year payback or break-even period, automatically goes to 14 or 18-year payback, just because they jumped the gun and they paid too much. They didn't shop around enough. They weren't aware of what they should be looking for. So this is kind of why we show those prices. This is what we think you should be looking for. Know the value of the energy you are replacing. If you pay SMUD $50 a month, you're replacing 10-cent power right now, 10 or 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Can you get something to replace that? You have to do better than 10 cents to really make it beneficial. So that's the thing, is if you're paying 50, 75, 85, in the future as we go to time of use, that might change, but those are kind of things you really need to consider. So the value of the energy you're replacing, if you're always paying SMUD 200 or something like that, you're paying 18 cents for a lot of those kilowatt hours. A system might allow you to get rid of those 18-cent power and maybe get it for 9 or 10. So that is the goal there, replacing all the expensive side of the power as opposed to any of the cheap one. The value of what you're purchasing is kind of the same thing as you're replacing. So if you're going to lease and all that, you're going to buy it from someone else instead of SMUD. That's all. You're not getting free power. For that matter, you still have to pay for that power. It's just hopefully cheaper than what you're paying now. A big sign on the bottom. Do not sign until you do enough research where you really feel comfortable with all those numbers. This is an example of a bad deal, kind of. A sample customer. So if you see the yellow on the bottom, that was his old yearly bill, $817. See, everyone is broken down per month. But he paid us $817. Then he got solar. He leased it. And so you can see, after the solar went in, his bill was only $195 to SMUD, but his lease payments were $807. So he paid a total of $1,000 instead of $817 because he was overpaying on the lease. So he signed a deal where he was paying roughly 11 or more cents per kilowatt hour. So that cost per kilowatt hour is so critical when you're doing leases. So in the first year, we saw this customer happened to be a very elderly customer. Turned out it was costing him more to do solar. He thought he would save some money. Do not oversize your system. So AB 920 legislation, it requires the utilities to pay for customers over generation. But it also means that we're not allowed to pay you at retail price if you make too much. And too much means in the course of a year, if you purchased $1,000 worth of power from SMUD, but you sold us $1,100, that $100 difference, we will pay you for it, but it's going to be at a wholesale price. It's as if we could buy that power from another utility. You essentially become a small utility. Well, if you're going to sell it to us for the going rate of wholesale, which is about 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and you had to make it for 10 cents a kilowatt hour, it doesn't make much sense. So you're going to say, I'm going to buy equipment to make it for 10 cents. I'm going to sell it to SMUD at 5. So we're really, really strict on keeping you from oversizing your system because we don't want to be faced with that scenario at the end of the year where we have to explain to you why it is we're paying you less than what it costs you to make it. Okay, now that's only the over the course of a year excess generation. On a monthly basis, you generate all you want. It just rolls over, So in the end of the year, if you purchase 1,000, we want you to have sold back no more than 1,000. So if you break even to zero, that's perfect. But we don't want you to be ahead because then we have to pay you wholesale for that difference. Let's see, the rollover KWHs is best if when you're occurs. So let's say you did size the system really tight, really close, and you do overgenerate, you get to choose whether you want to roll that energy or take payment for it. If you do it 1 year, which is totally possible, you could leave it on vacation for a month and a half, and that causes you to overgenerate because you didn't use it. You roll it over 1 year, you get the credit, no big deal. The next year you're back home, you don't do that anymore, no big deal. The problem comes in is when you're overbilled and you're going to do it year after year after year. So we do have an option where you choose to get paid the 5 cents. So if you're a year after year after year type person or situation, then we recommend taking the payment because you're better off paying, taking the 5 cents than the other option, and I'll mention that option is if you roll over year after year and you chose to take the KWHs, we can only roll those over 1 year. So 1 year you roll it over, if you don't consume it, you lose it the second year. So we have seen people who way oversize the system and then change their habits and under-consumed and became habitual overgenerators, and they lose money every year. So there we tell them, take the payment because you sort of at least get 50% of your money back versus lose all the generation. So hopefully that makes some sense. I know that's a lot of stuff. So is solar right for me? Solar system. There's a solar system estimator on the SMUD website. You can go in there, run some numbers, play with that thing, get some ideas. We have numbers on there. You can call us and run your ideas through. Say, here's what I come up with. There's one question I have or whatever. Anything we can clarify to make that decision a little bit easier, better, more knowledgeable decision. So then it just goes on how the process, so the applicant applies to SMUD for interconnection. Usually the contractor will do that, but you can do it as a self-install homeowner too. We go through the approval process. We let you know that it's ready to go ahead and do your project. And then it goes through the permitting agencies and stuff like that. Eventually we'll put a meter and you're up and running. That's kind of a quick scenario of how it works. I know I'm really close on time here, if not over. SMUD approval, guys. So this is the same thing, the process. So I'll just click to this. This is, again, the process. I don't think there's anything there that really stands out. Production meter is set. The billing is notified. So your billing will set up for PV billing. He has on the bottom there, when you get your first bill, you get really frustrated. If you do go solar eventually and you get that first bill and it makes no sense, always feel free to call us because there's some explanations that we're always willing to walk you through it because it does change a little bit on the layout of it. But it all means the same thing in the end. It's the same amount of most important takeaways today. Understand your energy use. That is critical. Know where you're using your energy if you can and what it is you want to replace and how to do that. Because if it's simply you're using equipment the wrong way, maybe your heating system or something, maybe your thermostat is old and you don't know how to use it, you could be using extra energies just because of that. So understand what you're trying to replace or why. That way, you're not going to buy a system that generates power that you could have reduced simply by changing your habits or maybe a cheaper piece of equipment versus a solar system. Work out those numbers before you sign anything. There's never a rush on this stuff. Get multiple bids. That's a big, big picture. I've seen people pay $10 a watt and say, was this the best bid you got? And they say, that's the only one I got. I just like the guy. That's not a reason to spend $40,000. So hopefully I didn't fly through this thing. There was a lot of slides, but And then at the same time, hopefully you were asking questions and Levi was up to speed on answering those questions. So I think I will end it here. We also do the classes at the SMUD facility if anyone wants to look at those. And let's see, yeah, we do have classes coming up in February, I believe, and then we'll have some more of these webinars. Hopefully we covered a lot of stuff for you. Feel free to call SMUD and ask for the solar department if you have any more questions. Okay, I'll sign off, and I think we got to figure out how to turn off the system.
Once again, thank you for joining us for our first of 2017 at Solar Right for You webinar. I hope this was very informative for you. We still have Levi for a couple more minutes for quick questions. Hector Ortiz, as you have noticed, is quite the expert, and we appreciate him coming in and doing a webinar for us. Once again, please go to smud.org. In the search function, hit workshops, and you can see all of our other residential and commercial classes. If you are intrigued to learn more about solar, we have a longer workshop located at SMUD, so please see the calendar of workshops for what dates are coming up this spring for other solar classes that go into a little more depth. Once again, thank you for joining SMUD tonight on our Is Solar Right for You webinar. We'll be signing off now.